The story begins with Gamin Yoon, a 15-year-old student, sitting in his chaotic classroom and attempting to review his exam paper. However, we quickly discover that Gamin Yoon struggles with studying despite his determination to excel. His frustration with his lack of progress leads him to throw his red marker away, inadvertently hitting the table and causing it to bounce off into the background. As the scene shifts, Gamin's internal monologue continues. Next, we observe Gamin Yoon returning home with a martial arts book in hand and a hopeful grin on his face. He is eager to read the newly released book that evening. His attention then shifts to two women conversing inside the house. Gamin's mother introduces him to his new tutor, Haekyong Lee, a 23-year-old woman. Gamin Yoon reacts with surprise and discomfort, concealing the book behind his back and avoiding eye contact as he walks away with a simple greeting. Gamin Yoon's mother expresses concern about his behavior and urges Ms. Lee to establish a good relationship with her son, to which Ms. Lee responds with a nervous laugh. Time progresses, and it is now 6 p.m. Gamin Yoon sits at his study table with Ms. Lee, who continues teaching him math. She praises Gamin Yoon for his quick comprehension and believes that with consistent effort, his grades will improve. To motivate him, she asks him to repeat after her with enthusiastic energy. Although Gamin Yoon matches her mood with less enthusiasm, but he still participates. 2 years later, we find Gamin Yoon in his high school uniform, reviewing his answers. Despite the passage of time, his grades remain unchanged. Though Ms. Lee's teaching is effective, Gamin Yoon lacks a natural aptitude for studying. Suddenly, an orange-haired student named Hyunwoo Lee rushes in, aggressively dragging another student with him and slamming their head onto Gamin Yoon's table. Gamin Yoon is thrown off balance as the rest of the class cheers for Hyunwoo Lee. Hyunwoo Lee continues the assault on the other students, punching them repeatedly while the class cheers him on. Gamin Yoon regains his footing, collects his notebook, and brushes off the dust. He remains indifferent to the ongoing brawl and distances himself from the chaotic crowd. Gamin Yoon attends Yusung Technical High School, known for its notorious reputation as a school for delinquents. It is a dangerous place where survival of the fittest prevails. Despite the challenges, Gamin Yoon sees potential opportunities for those who have not given up on their studies. He embraces the motto, "I create opportunities even in the most challenging situations." Gamin Yoon voluntarily enrolled in the school to pursue his dream of attending a 4-year college. He believes that excelling in this environment will give him a competitive edge due to his peers' lack of interest in academics. Assuming that he can withstand 3 years in this setting, that is, but Gamin still has hope that it will work out. As Gamin Yoon walks through the school corridors, lost in thought, he locks eyes with a delinquent holding a cigarette. The encounter prompts the delinquent to threaten Gamin Yoon, who reacts by crouching under a window to avoid detection. Returning to the classroom, Gamin Yoon sits at his desk, attempting to study amid the usual chaos of students fighting, chatting, sleeping, and playing video games. The teacher comes in and announces the replacement of the previous class teacher, but the announcement does not surprise the class. It isn't even acknowledged by anyone in the class other than Gamin Yoon himself. However, the reason for Gamin Yoon paying mind to such an announcement was because it involved someone he had known for a period of time. Gamin Yoon is taken aback to see Ms. Haekyong Lee, his former tutor, as the new homeroom teacher. Seeing Ms. Lee reminds Gamin Yoon of their conversations about their dreams. Ms. Lee had aspired to pass the teacher certification exam and help guide students in the right direction. She thought that with correct guidance, any student would be able to succeed and become a better person. The flashback ends, and we return to the present. Ms. Lee remains largely ignored by the class, with only Gamin paying attention to her presence. Gamin Yoon assumes that Ms. Lee must have failed her exam since she joined a private school like Yusung Technical High School. The teacher who introduced Ms. Lee to the class departs, leaving her feeling uneasy and uncertain about handling the class in its current state. She tries to assert control by slamming her hands on the table to gain attention, only to be suddenly met with a flying bottle that struck her hand, causing her to scream in pain. Hyunwoo Lee is responsible for throwing the bottle and dismisses the incident with a casual wave. He demands Ms. Lee conclude the morning meeting and starts making fun of her. As Ms. Lee endures further mockery, A student standing behind Hyunwoo Lee notices it was his bottle that was used and confronts Hyunwoo Lee, resulting in a heated argument. The conflict escalates as Hyunwoo Lee throws the student out of the classroom window, resulting in the breaking of glass and the shattered fragments to scatter all over the place. Ms. Lee watches in horror as the glass shatters and the student lands in the schoolyard. Hyunwoo Lee follows, climbing down to continue the fight as a crowd gathers, cheering for Hyunwoo Lee and some even betting on the outcome. As Hyunwoo Lee is about to strike his opponent, a burly, bald man in a tracksuit rushes towards them, scaring the students away. The man, known as Tom Kench, berates Ms. Lee for not intervening and criticizes her lack of responsibility. He reveals that Ms. Lee is only a contract teacher attempting to mock her in a condescending way and leaves the scene, instructing her to clean up the broken glass. While cleaning up the scene, Ms. Lee cuts her finger on a shard of glass, causing her to bleed. She sighs, tears welling up in her eyes. Just then, a hand offers her a band-aid, and Ms. Lee turns to thank the person, surprised to find Gamin Yoon offering the help. Sometime later, Ms. Lee and Gamin Yoon have moved to another location. Ms. Lee expresses regret over leaving tutoring to focus on her studies. Gamin inquires whether she plans to stay at the school and warns her about the challenges ahead. He explains that the recent incident was only the beginning and that similar behavior led the previous homeroom teacher to quit. Despite the circumstances, Ms. Lee remains hopeful that she can positively influence the students and guide them toward better choices. As she continues her thoughts, Gamin Yoon interrupts her with a heavy expression, warning her of Hyunwoo Lee and his gang approaching. Ms. Lee slips away without informing Gamin Yoon to confront Hyunwoo Lee about smoking on school grounds. Ms. Lee demands they extinguish their cigarettes, which surprises Gamin Yoon watching from a distance. Hyunwoo Lee dismisses her request, explaining that the school does not penalize them for smoking and even provides them with receptacles for cigarette butts. Unfazed, Ms. Lee steps closer to Hyunwoo Lee, grabbing his hand to express her genuine desire to improve their health. Gamin Yoon observes, surprised to see Hyunwoo Lee drop his cigarette in response. Hyunwoo Lee sarcastically asks if she genuinely intends to help him quit smoking, and Ms. Lee enthusiastically responds. Hyunwoo Lee suddenly extends his hand toward Ms. Lee's face, and a loud smack shocks Gamin. Ms. Lee stumbles backward, falling to the ground as Hyunwoo Lee and his gang mock her. Hyunwoo Lee challenges Ms. Lee's commitment, calling her just a contract teacher. Despite being struck, Ms. Lee persists in trying to teach them, only to face more insults and threats from Hyunwoo Lee and his group. Gamin Yoon, recalling his recent conversation with Ms. Lee and memories of their past interactions, steps forward to shield her with his school blazer. The group makes fun of Gamin Yoon, but he remains focused on Ms. Lee and asks her to hold onto his jacket. One of the gang members charges at Gamin Yoon, aiming to kick him, but Gamin Yoon evades and tackles him to the ground. Hyunwoo Lee and the gang are amused by their friend's failed attempt and mock him for being defeated. The same member charges at Gamin Yoon again, but this time, Gamin Yoon takes a stance inspired by the famous one-inch punch. With a swift and precise strike, Gamin Yoon knocks out the attacking student. Hyunwoo Lee and the others are stunned by Gamin's unexpected martial arts skill. Hyunwoo Lee, angered by the situation, rushes at Gamin Yoon with the intent to beat him. This moment reveals the unusual interest Gamin Yoon's mother referred to when she introduced him to Ms. Lee. As a child, Gamin Yoon had been fascinated by Bruce Lee and had trained extensively in martial arts, learning from online videos and practical experiences. Back in the present, Gamin Yoon suddenly performs a backflip, evading Hyunwoo Lee's attack and causing his glasses to fly off in the process. The motion also strikes Hyunwoo Lee's chin, sending him backward. The gang is shocked to see Hyunwoo Lee was unconscious on the ground, with foam emerging from his mouth. The bullies hurriedly gather Hyunwoo Lee and flee the scene. Gamin Yoon sighs and brushes his hair aside as he watches them retreat. Ms. Lee, speechless from witnessing the fight, is startled when Gamin Yoon approaches her. He extends his hand to offer support, and she looks up in surprise. Gamin Yoon recalls Ms. Lee's earlier regret about leaving tutoring and asks her to reconsider staying at the school to help him study. He requests that she reconsider her decision to quit tutoring. The The scene shifts to one of Hyunwoo Lee's associates informing a muscular individual in the gym about Gamin Yoon's recent victory over Hyunwoo Lee. Additional scenes show various gang members discussing Gamin Yoon, with some planning to confront him. In the final scene, Ms. Lee reaches out and firmly grasps Gamin Yoon's hand. This is the story of Gamin Yoon, a student who continues to struggle with academics while facing fierce battles. His journey toward college admission is marked by perseverance, even if it comes at a cost. In the early morning, we observe Gamin engaged in physical exercise at the children's playground. A security guard stands nearby, commending Gamin for his exemplary form and robust health. Lost in contemplation, the guard continues to admire Gamin, referring to him as a work of art. However, upon realizing that Gamin has exceeded his predetermined time, the guard promptly alerts him, prompting Gamin to react anxiously and stumble. Expressing gratitude to the guard for the timely notification, Gamin hastily departs, proceeding cautiously as he unlocks the door to his residence. He retrieves and reinstalls a previously removed battery, essential for his act of sneaking out earlier. Just as the battery is reinstalled, an alarm sounds, prompting Gamin to swiftly retreat to his bedroom, concealing himself beneath a blanket to evade detection by his mother. As his mother approaches to awaken him for school, Gamin calmly emerges from beneath the blanket, feigning the appearance of having just awakened from slumber. Resolving to dedicate himself to diligent study, he prepares for the school day. Shifting focus, we are introduced to Ms. Lee, who has also recently risen from a restless sleep. Still preoccupied by events from the previous day, which resulted in her obtaining only a scant 3 hours of rest, Ms. Lee reflects on Gamin's words, evoking a sense of apprehension. Despite her unease, she endeavors to steel herself for another day at school. Arriving at the high school, Ms. Lee enters with trepidation, inwardly reassuring herself that all will be well. Meanwhile, Gamin, noticing Ms. Lee's arrival but refraining from approaching her, proceeds to his classroom, contemplating his aspirations of attending a 4-year college. Determined to seek like-minded peers, he scans the classroom, ultimately fixing his attention on Sein Kim, a fellow student from the mechanics major and at the age of 17 immersed in study. Gamin, who had been trying to have a chat with Sein Kim for the past few days, is rejected again as Sein Kim promptly gets up to leave the class, not wanting to deal with Gamin any longer. But undeterred, Gamin resolves to enlist Sein Kim's support in pursuing their shared goal of college admission. Transitioning to Sein Kim, we find him pondering over the person who had been asking him to tutor him for days, which he finds bothersome. His musings are interrupted by the sudden appearance of Jae-hwang Chu, a senior student from welding major and at the age of 18, who grabs his shoulder without any prior notice, making Sein Kim react aggressively by whacking his hand away, thinking it might be Gamin again who came to bother him. This act from Sein Kim ruins Jae-hwang Chu's mood as his changed aggressive demeanor incites fear in Sein Kim. Forced to accompany Jae-hwang Chu outside, Sein Kim's apprehension mounts. In a different setting, we find ourselves in the staff room, where a teacher, addressing Ms. Lee sternly, admonishes her for her conduct during a recent meeting and attributes responsibility for previous incident regarding the broken glass windows and the fight to her. With a stern warning to improve her performance, Ms. Lee is reminded of the impending school inspector's visit and instructed to ensure a trouble-free inspection. Departing the staff room, Ms. Lee reflects on her frustration with the school's inaction regarding student misconduct. She had informed the school about the students smoking openly, but no action was taken regardless. Her ruminations are interrupted by the sound of violence nearby, drawing her attention to Jae-hwang Chu assaulting Sein Kim, accompanied by 3 other students being disciplined. Jae-hwang Chu strikes Sein Kim on the side of his neck with a kick, which results in Sein Kim falling over with tears welling up in his eyes as he struggles, gasping for air. Not satisfied with the punishment, Jae-hwang Chu decides he would have to hit Sein Chu with an iron pipe instead if he wanted him to learn. Witnessing the brutality, Ms. Lee is overcome with horror and attempts to intervene, only to be paralyzed by fear and memories of a prior encounter with Hyunwoo Lee. Her legs tremble as she plops over on her knees. Her heart starts thumping louder and louder as she struggles with her emotions. Just then, Gamin emerges to aid her, grabbing her by her wrist and pulling her over from the ground and up on her feet. He looks over at the situation as Ms. Lee looks somewhat relieved to see Gamin arrive and clenches his fists with a serious look on his face. Gamin's resolute demeanor hints at his determination to prevent Seon Kim's potential transfer, complicating his plans. We see Jae-hwang Chu looking down at Seon nonchalantly, who's on the ground, crouched over with hands on top of his head, begging for him to stop and apologizing with tears running down his cheeks. Gamin Yoon, who had just arrived outside, decides to go ahead and confront Jae-hwang Chu when Ms. Lee, startled by this sudden action of his, stops him to ask what he was going to do. Here we learn the exact goal of Gamin Yoon, who had been planning to make Seon Kim join his study group. We end up with another flashback where we see a 3 years younger Gamin Yoon, who had been busy studying at the desk in his room at the time, overhear a simple phrase that came up during the conversation between her mother and her friend regarding a study group. The other lady can be seen bragging about the improvement in her son's grade, due to him being a part of a study group, and brings up a suggestion of letting Gamin Yoon join one as well. Gamin Yoon's mother, knowing about her son's situation, is only able to provide an awkward smile as she discards the suggestion indirectly by making an excuse and decides to rather hire a private tutor for him instead. Still in the flashback, we see Gamin Yoon attending a middle school. Inside the classroom, Gamin Yoon gets rejected by a nerdy-looking guy with glasses, as they didn't want a guy who came second last in the midterms joining their study group. According to them, there was nothing they could possibly learn from Gamin with his grades being so low. Dejected from the rejection, Gamin Yoon walks away with drooped shoulders as the group of kids keep on making fun of him behind his back. We then learn that even later on, he kept asking other classmates of his to let him join their study groups, but no one took him in due to his poor grades. They all gave him various differing reasons to not let him in, but all besides one person. He had thought that he would finally get to join a study group after not getting rejected outright for once, and is elated when he suddenly gets a notification for a new message on his phone, only to see him getting rejected again through text. Taking out his frustration by screaming out his lungs, he heads on home to continue to work hard on improving his grades. It is at late night and Gamin Yoon is busy studying as usual when the door to his room opens and her mother enters to check in on her son and to also discuss about the tutor she had previously been talking about. She notices that Gamin Yoon had been crying and rushes in to console him. She asks if anything had happened at school, but Gamin Yoon denies the idea, attributing it to his frustration rather than any specific event. For Gamin Yoon, who had been prevented from joining a study group for so long, he naturally started wanting to do exactly that even more. That is how it became somewhat of a dream of Gamin to join a study group someday. Now, back at the present, Gamin Yoon continues on towards Jae-hwang Chu, his mind busy with his own thoughts and set on helping Seon Kim so that he could join his study group later. All of a sudden, Ms. Lee reaches out with her hand and catches Gamin Yoon by his wrists, halting his advance and confusing him by this act of hers. She knew that Gamin Yoon was going to resort to violence, but she couldn't stand it, as according to her, even though a place where fights were the norm, this was still strictly a school only meant for studying. As their teacher, she simply couldn't allow her students to hurt each other. Seeing Ms. Lee act like this, Gamin Yoon shows a mischievous grin as he asks, seemingly affirming if it was alright as long as he didn't use his fists. Right at the same time, Jae-hwang Chu also decides to rush ahead with a punch ready to smack Seon Kim on his head as he grabs hold of him by his collar. Abruptly, big amount of smoke rushes in, filling the room to the brim, causing the movements of Jae-hwang Chu to come to an end as he puts a hand to his nose, covering it to prevent coughing. Surprised by the unexpected situation, he turns around, trying to find the culprit, and notices an empty fire extinguisher holder, which seems to give him an understanding as to how the situation evolved into something like this. Despite being angry by the current situation but being helpless about it, all Jae-hwang Chu could do was take out his anger on his juniors who he had been punishing before, who could not stand the smoke and had started coughing endlessly. Jae-hwang Chu screams at the air, but the target for his threats being the cause of the smoke filling the room when Gamin decides to hastily fling the fire extinguisher to the ground and rush in towards Jae-hwang Chu and Seon Kim to grab Seon Kim and get him out of there. Gamin Yoon brushes past Jae-hwang Chu very roughly, causing him to fall back as he is successful in grabbing Seon Kim and emerges out from the smoke with a welding helmet covering his head. The fallen Jae-hwang Chu hastily turns around to check on the identity of the man who had done all this, but realizes that the person had been long gone through the back door. Ms. Lee, who had just witnessed this whole event, is dumbstruck as she just stands there without moving, contemplating on the method Gamin Yoon had used to help his classmate. She is glad that Gamin Yoon didn't get into a fight, but finds the overall method a bit too extra than necessary. The scene changes and we see Seon Kim's shocked exclaims after learning that the person who had saved him was Gamin Yoon. Gamin Yoon, thinking that he would be grateful for his help, asks him to join his study group in turn, but is cut off by an angry Seon Kim asking him the reason for messing with Jae Hwang Chu, even when he knew who he was. Seon is assuming that he does. But Gamin Yoon's genuine lack of knowledge about the person in question causes Seon Kim to be taken aback. We then learn through Seon Kim's mouth that they are the infamous White Lead 4 of Yusung Technical High, that they are the kids of the leaders of the famously devious White Lead gang of Incheon and had grown up under the gangsters since they were young. Seon Kim is about to continue with his explanation when he gets suddenly cut off by Gamin Yoon, who, still with an impassive face, shows no interest in them whatsoever as they had nothing to do with studies. Taken aback again by Gamin Yoon's thought process, Seon Kim snaps with anger and yells at Gamin, who had been trying to convince him to join his study group, which got promptly ignored by Seon Kim at the time, causing him to fall back in surprise. The cause of Seon Kim's anger is because he thinks that Gamin Yoon interfering would only drag him deeper into trouble. As the guy, Jae Hwang Chu was someone who would leave anyone alone after he defeats them once, and as long as he gets a hold of you, it was better for weak kids like Seon Kim to just get things over with and be done. But since he didn't get to end it, he would have to go through this again. Seon Kim continues telling off Gamin Yoon, but turns around and starts walking away as Gamin Yoon tries to get up and go after him. He stops in his tracks for a moment to turn around and calls out the pretense of Gamin Yoon for not knowing about them because there was no need for him to cover his face with a mask if he didn't. But he had done so nonetheless because Gamin Yoon also wanted to avoid trouble with them. The statement made by Seon Kim hits the bullseye, catching Gamin Yoon off guard as he dramatically acts MO and flops down on his knees. Just then, a voice calls out to Seon Kim suddenly, startling both him and Gamin Yoon, who in turn hastily puts back his mask on to cover his face. Jae Hwang Chu, who had arrived in front of them, mocks them for their stupidity as they didn't take into account the trail the foam from the fire extinguisher left behind, making it easy for Jae Hwang Chu to catch up. More so interested in the friend who had helped Seon Kim escape, Jae Hwang Chu asks about his friend's identity. Seon Kim answers he doesn't know the guy, and Gamin Yoon, catching his intent of protecting him behind that sentence, is moved and at the same time also recalls what Seon Kim had told him earlier about this being a matter of survival, which was even more important than studying to him. Angered by the act of Seon Kim at the last second, Jae Hwang Chu grabs him by his collar as he threatens to beat him until he wets himself when an abrupt kick comes flying in, landing directly on his face. This results in Jae Hwang Chu crashing on the ground, and we see Gamin Yoon standing behind Seon Kim with one leg in the air as if taking a kicking pose. But it doesn't take long for Jae Hwang Chu to get back up on his feet as he curses at and questions about the person who kicked him. Not expecting something like this would happen, a surprised Seon Kim turns around to find it was Gamin Yoon who had just kicked Jae Hwang Chu right on his face. He hadn't expected Gamin Yoon to be that good at fighting and is also somewhat depressed that his lies to protect Gamin Yoon had all but gone to waste. This is when Gamin Yoon calls out to Seon Kim again, telling him that he would make it so that Seon would only have to focus on his studies without worrying about his survival at all, and offering him a place in his study group. Questioning Gamin's nonchalant behavior despite currently being in a fight and his face revealed, Seon Kim is not sure what to think about. Gamin Yoon continues on with his words towards Seon Kim when Jae Hwang Chu arrives in front of him with a fist, ready to hit him. Despite the close distance between Gamin and Jae Hwang's fist, Gamin seems to not even care about the incoming attack as he just casually dodges the punch by moving his upper body back by a bit, all the while in the midst of talking to Seon Kim about his plan to pass the entrance exams. Both Seon Kim and Jae Hwang Chu are surprised by the fact that Gamin Yoon dodged the punch just like that, but they are surprised even more so by the fact that he did it without even looking at the opponent. Jae Hwang just as suddenly readies another punch as Gamin is busy explaining his plans to Seon Kim. This freaks out Seon Kim as he warns Gamin about the attack hastily. But Gamin Yoon, without even registering the warning and focusing only on having a chat, dodges again by ducking the swinging fist with ease. Jae Hwang Chu, after the second punch, realizes that Gamin was not just randomly dodging his blows and that even when he was talking about the exams, he was predicting his moves. Finding the situation and the person amusing, Jae-hwang grins and starts hopping and throwing out jabs in the air, seemingly to intimidate his opponent while also talking about how their school was all about one's fist and that such a place would never change because of the likes of Gamin-yoon. He charges at Gamin-yoon again with a fist as Seon Kim closes his eyes in horror, not wanting to witness the eventual defeat of Gamin. The words of Jae-hwang had also affected Seon, as he had also genuinely started believing that such a place wouldn't change just because a single person makes a stand. The fist nears the helmet Gamin is wearing, and in the next scene, we see the helmet shooting up towards the sky. It then falls back down as the rest of the scene comes into view and Gamin is seen standing with Jae-hwang's hand in his grasp along with a not-so-amused expression on his face. Jae-hwang, caught up in Gamin's hand, is baffled after realizing how amazing his strength really was. Gamin-yoon still expresses his unwillingness to fight, but Jae-hwang ignores it outright and throws out another punch, wanting to make him let go of his hand. The fist zooms in when it abruptly comes to a halt as Gamin, with a speed hard to catch with normal eyes, using casual taps 3 times in a row to kill the momentum of the fist, succeeds in stopping the punch without much effort. Without giving any time to Jae-hwang to recover, he twists the other hand he already had in his grip as he smacks Jae-hwang's open face with a fast jab, causing him to stumble and fall back onto the ground. Jae-hwang Chu is completely frozen by the fact that he couldn't even hit him once, as Gamin-yoon shows regret at unknowingly fighting back but recovers fast and quickly goes back to try and coax Seon into joining his study group. Seon, hardly believing the fact that Jae-hwang was so easily taken down by Gamin-yoon, looks ahead with a blank stare but comes back to his mind after getting called out by Gamin again. He starts believing that maybe things could really work, and after looking back on the life he had lived so far, decides to focus on solely what he wanted and agrees to join Gamin's study group with a bright smile on his face. Elated by the fact that he had won Seon over, Gamin turns around to do a small celebratory hurrah when the bells suddenly go off, announcing the start of the classes. They decide to rush back to their class, leaving Jae-hwang Chu behind by himself, contemplating over the son of the operation head of the White Lead Gang, Jae-hwang Chu's loss. He clenches his jaws in anger as he tries denying the obvious that had happened. He seems to be getting progressively angrier when suddenly a voice comes out from behind him telling him that he had indeed in fact lost, leaving Jae-hwang Chu stunned. He turns around while cursing to find the speaker, only to get struck with surprise after learning that it was Pai Hanwol, the son of the boss of the White Lead Gang. Jae-hwang asks him if he had seen everything, to which Hanwol replies that he was impressed to see Jae-hwang, with 4 years of kickboxing experience, get beaten down so one-sidedly. Hanwol then orders Jae-hwang to get up, which he easily complies to, but is about to ask the reason behind it when suddenly, Hanwol throws a punch out, hitting straight at the face of Jae-hwang, causing him to crash back with a loud grunt. Hanwol then walks up to the fallen Jae-hwang, who has blood streaming down his nose, and asks him on who he thought was stronger. Hanwol pieces together the things and comes to the conclusion that the guy who defeated Hyuna Lee should have also been him, and shows his curiosity to see how long he would be able to hold out with that freshman spirit of his. The dean is seen busy cleaning the school because the inspector was going to be visiting their school for school inspection. He curses the vice principal for dumping all of the responsibilities on him as he dumps the collected garbage onto the garbage cans. The fumes produced by the garbage fills him with nausea, causing him to gag and drop the garbage on the ground. Having a hard time with cleaning the garbage, he thinks of Ms. Lee, who he considers to be a pushover, and decides he would order her to clean up in his place. At the same time, Ms. Lee was also busy cleaning up the room covered in foam residue which Gamin-yoon had made a mess out of. She contemplates over what she could do for the time being to help Gamin with his study group idea. As she is caught up in her own thoughts, Dean arrives at the place, making Ms. Lee flinch as she turns around to greet him. But the dean immediately starts scolding Ms. Lee, who he thought was goofing around at the scene instead of helping with the cleaning. He then notices the condition the room was in and angrily demands the name of the student who caused this from Ms. Lee. He turns around and starts heading straight out of the room in anger, anticipating the beating he would give to those kids. A kid is passing through the lab as the dean is getting out when he gets noticed by the dean and is stopped by him to interrogate regarding the student who had caused the mess. The kid, noticing Ms. Lee in distress, makes up an excuse and says that it was his fault that it happened, as he made a mistake while moving out the fire extinguishers which caused the room to be in the state it was in. He succeeds in fooling the dean and then prompts him to leave the area hurriedly. The dean calms down and leaves while ordering Ms. Lee to come with him to continue with the cleaning. In the classroom, Seon Kim goes over the weaknesses of Gamin Yoon in regards to studying and tells him to quit studying as it seems to him that Gamin has no hope in the studying field, causing Gamin Yoon to sulk at the remarks. Seon Kim then asks him why he wants to focus on studying when instead he could be better off as an athlete with a physique like his. Gamin also asks a question in turn and Seon answers that he had to attend Yusung High even though he was quite good at studying because his family didn't want him to study. He then pulls out a notebook of his which he considers a treasure which he had made himself by collecting all the information that couldn't be found in basic books. He gives it to Gamin, telling him to refer to it whenever he got stuck with something he didn't understand. At the same time, Jae-hwang Chu enters the classroom while cursing and suddenly kicks a chair which crashes into Gamin, causing him to fall over. He orders everyone in the classroom to leave and then picks up the notebook Gamin had received from Seon. He mocks the idea of considering something like books to be anything other than firewood when they were in Yusung Tech High School. Using a lighter, he sets fire to the book as Gamin struggles to deal with the head injury which had caused blood to trickle down his face. On the other side, the school inspector, Tae-soo Park from the Incheon Education Department, has arrived for the observation and is concerned over the low rate of applications from the school. The vice principal walking along with him tries to make up excuses to downplay the situation, but the school inspector refuses to buy any of it. As he is busy walking around inspecting the school, he notices Ms. Lee and goes over to greet her. Finding her somewhat familiar, he asks if they had met before, which Ms. Lee declines with a weary face. Suddenly, Seon Kim comes running over in a hurry and tells Ms. Lee about the trouble Jae-hwang had caused, leading a fire to erupt in the classroom. Meanwhile, in the smoke-filled classroom, Jae-hwang Chu and Gamin Yoon are on a standoff with the fire surrounding them both, ready to confront each other. At the same time, the vice principal tries to downplay the situation Seon had informed them about from embarrassment and fear, and tells the inspector to not to worry about it, and proceeds to drag the inspector to another place while leaving Ms. Lee to go handle the situation herself. Ms. Lee and Seon both take off to the classroom in a hurry as Seon recounts the events that had happened leading to the class catching on fire. After Jae-hwan had ordered for everyone except Gamin to leave the classroom, he lit up his lighter and threw it towards the notebook Gamin had received. Wanting to prevent the book from burning, Gamin lunges forward to catch the lighter, but is interrupted by a kick from Jae-hwan. Seeing this, Seon tries to interrupt but gets intimidated by Jae-hwan, who threatens him saying he would continue with him after he was done with Gamin, making him freeze and left unable to do anything about the situation. He also leaves the classroom while continuously feeling sorry for not having been of any help to Gamin with clenched fists. Jae-hwang comments on the gall Gamin had to just calmly sit in his classroom and continue with his studies after what he had done with Jae-wang's face, thinking that was the end of it. The observing students comment, showing surprise due to the fight taking place as Gamin notices his bag had also caught on fire. Jae-hwan catches this momentary lack of attention from Gamin and throws a kick straight at his face, wanting to catch him off guard, but Gamin reflexively succeeds in blocking the attack with his hands. Jae-hwang is surprised to see him again not pay any attention to him during the fight and is irritated by it. Still caught up by the fact that the notebooks inside his back were burning, he still doesn't even bother to look at Jae-hwang and runs towards the books in utter dismay after pushing away Jae-hwang by hitting him on his face. From the outside, Seon turns away his gaze, not wanting to see Gamin suffer any longer, as the other students comment on Gamin's bad luck for catching attention of one of the white lead gang member. Meanwhile, inside the classroom, seeing Gamin still not looking at him, Jae-hwang snaps furiously as he demands Gamin to pay attention to their fight. Angered by the fact that the help he had finally received in the form of a study guide from Seon was now useless, he demands an apology for Seon from Jae-hwang, but he only gets mocked by Jae-hwan more, and all it does is anger him further. Ready for a fight, Jae-hwan rushes ahead with a chair in hand, but Gamin uses his leg to trip him and then hits him furiously on his face with what Jae-hwan considers as weird punch movements, throwing him towards the place the burning bag was at. Jae-hwan grabs onto the burning bag and throws it at Gamin in retaliation, but Gamin uses his leg to hook and catch the bag as he spins in the air in a mesmerizing manner, drawing an arc of fire in the air and landing a blow on Jae-hwan's chin. All the while, Jae-hwang fails to make any sense of the scene he was witnessing in front of him until he finally gets knocked out from the hit. At the same time, both Ms. Lee and Seon, who arrive outside the classroom, are greeted with a flying Jae-hwan, knocked unconscious, crashing right in front of them. Both of them are startled by this scene as Gamin rushes over and starts slapping Jae-hwan across his face, trying to wake him up so that he can then hear an apology from him. Caught up in this act, he fails to notice the inspector standing right beside him with a stern face and is startled when he finally notices the inspector who had spoken up, asking for Gamin's name. After some time, we see Ms. Lee getting scolded by the vice principal for not adequately controlling her class and then inquire how a fire could break out on the day the inspector visited. He also asks about Gamin and the reason behind him beating up his senior that ruthlessly. He then starts walking away in anger, angrily bumping into Ms. Lee on the way as he heads for the office door. He opens the door and is suddenly greeted by the inspector standing there. The inspector, noticing the vice principal, tells him to bring the student from earlier to him and also asks Ms. Lee to follow along with him. Meanwhile, all the students were talking about the current happening where a freshman beat up a white lead gang member, and at the same time, Gamin Yoon was sitting alone in the disciplinary room regretting his decision, fearing expulsion from the school. As he is busy contemplating over his choices, Seon comes in, making Gamin question his presence there. After learning the reason he came over and seeing the consideration Seon showed for him, he feels relieved. Gamin tells him about how he couldn't handle seeing all the effort Seon had put into making the guidebook go into the flames so easily. Seon also takes out the glasses Gamin had lost during his fight and gives it back to him, receiving a thanks from Gamin in return. But before Gamin is done showing his gratitude, Seon interrupts him instead to deliver his own gratitude for all Gamin had done for him during and prior to the fight. The inspector, along with the vice principal and Ms. Lee, then arrives and asks Seon to leave the room so as to further their interrogation of Gamin Yoon. Gamin confesses that the reason he did so was because he burned the book a friend had given him, which astonishes the vice principal as he could not believe that he would fight someone for such a small reason and snaps at him for causing violence in school for such a small matter. Ms. Lee, who had been listening, tells them about Jae-hwan Chu, but the vice principal, fearing the loss of reputation their school would suffer from, shuts her down and decides on expelling Gamin Yoon from the school, bringing an end to the case. Hearing the vice principal mention expulsion, Gamin is thrust into utter despair as he had finally found someone he could study with and even hoped to do well together, but it wasn't even able to begin and it was already going to end. Refusing to back down, Ms. Lee argues further against the vice principal and blames the school instead for not caring about what they should and for instead focusing on what the inspector speaks, as it was easier to cater to one inspector than 400 students. After hearing this, a surprised expression fills the face of the inspector as he turns around to address the fact that he finally recognized that Ms. Lee was in fact the one who had placed first on the teacher certification exam last year. Meanwhile, outside the nurse office, two students are busy talking about the incident involving Gamin Yoon among each other, as they continuously mock Jae-hwan Chu for losing so pathetically as a big man can be seen slowly creeping up towards them, reaching out with his hands, intending to grab the heads of the students and bang them together. Suddenly hit on the head by the big man from behind, they both fall down, and after realizing it was the doing of Sanjin Bang, one of the sons of the White Lead's director, who was busy laughing at Jae-hwan Chu, they both get up to run away while they had the chance. Wanting to look at Jae-hwan's face to further continue mocking him, he hits the door to the nurse's office, opening it with a bang and enters the room, but is astonished by something he sees in there. At the same time, an awkward silence fills the disciplinary room. Ignoring the words of Ms. Lee, the vice principal continues to blame Gamin Yoon for the use of violence at school as he continues to poke at Gamin's temples in a condescending manner. Ms. Lee reaches out and grabs the vice principal's hand as she couldn't stand seeing such action be done against the victim, who was instead being treated as the perpetrator. She relates violence to the dog-eat-dog environment the school had, saying that the students had no choice but to resort to violence in an environment like that. Ms. Lee continues to deny these claims to defend Gamin as they go back and forth shouting at each other. Suddenly, the inspector erupts with laughter as he comes forward to stop the vice principal and to praise Ms. Lee, also revealing the fact about her scoring top place in the teacher certification exam last year along with it, which astonishes both the vice principal and Gamin Yoon. Not wanting to believe it, the vice principal argues it to be but a simple misunderstanding, but the inspector walks past him, denying his claims and again addresses Ms. Lee asking if he was correct. Gamin Yoon is also first relieved to learn that Ms. Lee had succeeded in making her dream come true, but is then confused as to why she chose to give up on it and come to a place like Yusung Tech High instead. We learn that Ms. Lee had refused all the schools and had even pulled out of the Seoul Education Department because she wanted to change the school Gamin attended. The vice principal laughs at the idea of her, a simple contract teacher, changing an entire school by herself as the inspector asks her what she would do to change it. Thinking back on the experiences she had with Gamin, she firmly comes to a conclusion that the only thing she could do at the time was form a study group with the help of Gamin. The vice principal is baffled by this idea and tries to persuade the inspector into refusing it. Disregarding the vice principal, the inspector agrees with Ms. Lee and thinks that it would be a good start and that they should go for it, and leaves for his car. He opens the door to the car and sits inside to be greeted by his son Gunyeweb, whose hands were covered in blood, which he was busy wiping with a cloth. The father and son discuss about the prevailing violence in the school and the act Gunyeb had done, which Taisu Park thinks was going overboard. But Gunyeb tells him that he had to do so to send a message of sorts to the school that neglected its duties and always surrendered to power. The scene cuts back to the nurse's office as Sanjin finds it hard to believe that what he was witnessing was true. Behind the curtain, Jaehwan Chu can be seen tied up from his hands with blood covering his entire body, seemingly from getting beaten up by Gunyeb. Sanjin exclaims out in shock, wondering who could possibly do something so cruel like this. After that, with the headmaster's permission, Ms. Lee began to promote the in-school study group through handmade flyers. The students who saw the poster stuck on the notice board laughed at it as they thought that it was outright impossible for students to actually study in a place like Yusung Tech High, which was filled full of thugs. Sien passes by and hears the other students' opinions regarding the study group. According to the students, Gamin Yoon had only started the study group to lure in more people for him to beat up, and it was something that they shouldn't bother with. As Sien walks away from the place lamenting over the fact that such false rumors had spread about his fried gamin, Gunyeb walks in besides the other students, taking a peek at Miss Lee's information mentioned on the poster. The students scatter about and it is now evening. Hanwal arrives in front of the notice board, and after seeing the poster for study groups stuck on it, he peels it off and proceeds to rip it apart with a grin on his face. Time passes and it is now Saturday. Ms. Lee arrives in front of Gamin Yoon's house. She reminisces about the past when she used to go to Gamin's place for tutoring, all the while also preparing for the teacher examinations on the side. Suddenly, a security guard runs past her in a hurry, piquing her curiosity. She follows him to the park and is amazed to see Gamin Yoon exercising there. Not expecting Ms. Lee to be there, Gamin is startled and falls over from the bar he was doing the inverted push-ups on. After a while, Miss Lee and Gamin, with changed clothes, meet up as Miss Lee leads Gamin to a bookstore. As his midterm exams were coming near, she buys him all the essential books which she thought would help Gamin as thanks for helping her out with making the posters for the study group, while Gamin on the other side, sitting at a corner, is engrossed in a book about Bruce Lee which he finds interesting. Miss Lee walks up to an empty table and puts all of the books down with a thud. Gamin tags along from behind as he also proceeds to sit in front of her while questioning if she was really going to be buying so many books for him. He expresses his doubt and concern for failing to finish all of the books by the time exams come. He also talks about how he was surprised to find out that Miss Lee was the highest scorer in the teacher certification exam, even though he had heard people say it to be so tough. Noticing that Gamin was feeling down and unsure about himself, Miss Lee interrupts him and humbly declines the praise she received from Gamin, saying that doing well on a test and becoming a good teacher was completely different things and that he had to help her achieve her dream as well. There is also a pair of mother and son bickering behind them when suddenly the child besides them, who didn't want the book his mom was showing her, tosses the book right at Miss Lee. As Miss Lee is engrossed with her chat with Gamin, she fails to notice the incoming book, but Gamin, who saw the book, gets up hurriedly and whacks the book away with his hand, guarding her from it. Their faces are just inches away, but Miss Lee, without showing any embarrassment, reaches out and pats Gamin in the head while Gamin had jumped back in shock from the intimate distance between the two of them. She then thanks him and decides to get some food before finally heading back home. When she reaches her room, she notices loud voices coming out of her home and opens up the door while being wary and is shocked to see Hyunu and his gang at her place. Hyunu Lee, After seeing that Ms. Lee had finally arrived at her home, mockingly suggests she let them join their study group, as he then proceeds to slap Ms. Lee across her face. Conversely, Gammon also notices that one of the books he had bought got mixed up with Ms. Lee's, and thinking that it would be too much to wait 2 days to read the book he had been looking forward to reading so much, and decides to instead head over to Miss Lee's place just then to get the book back. Meanwhile, at some other place, Hanwol Fai is playing around with a college girl when Sanjin Bang comes in and suggests they kill Ms. Lee. But Hanwol continues to ignore him and instead just focuses on the girl, which irritates Sanjin as he shouts again with rage, wanting to catch his attention. Hanwol stops his conversation with the girl as he looks up and finally notices Sanjin standing there. He first tells Sanjin to not disturb them and leave, but instead Sanjin continues to further try and persuade Hanwol into taking action against the person who had beaten up Jia Huangchu to a pulp. But Hanwol, not liking his behavior at all, tells him to shut up as he stands up and walks up to him. He tells him that if it hadn't been for Jia Wang's father, he wouldn't even have been worthy of being in their group. He also comments that it was indeed quite fun for him to watch Jae Huang, who at first used to go to school with a stupid look on his face, change into someone that gets off on beating someone up. Thinking that the people who have tasted power were sure to change, he decides to instead focus on Gammon and see how fast he changes. On the other side, Hyanu Lee, who had propped the door open with the use of a crowbar, slaps Miss Lee across her face and starts cornering her towards another one of the door. The group continues to tease Ms. Lee from behind, and just as she is about to reach for her phone from inside her purse, she gets grabbed by hands reaching out from behind her and gets dragged inside as the door closes. One of the guys snatches away the phone from her hands and throws it on the ground, breaking it. Hyanu grabs Ms. Lee by her hands and throws her onto the ground as the other gang members start thrashing around her house, making a mess out of it. Hyanu, having already decided that they would traumatize Ms. Lee so much that she would never want to be a teacher again, grabs and pulls her by her hair, causing Ms. Lee to scream out for help. Just then, the door to the house opens as the group notices someone outside. They turn around to find Gunyeb standing at the door, who Miss Lee recognizes as the kid who had helped her escape from the scolding of the dean back then at the mechanical lab. Hyanu, thinking that it's just some random passerby, orders one of his gang members to go and deal with him quickly so as to make sure that no one disturbs them. The guy with a hoodie and a mask goes first while cracking his knuckles in confidence, but is knocked back really quickly with just a single punch from Gunyeb. This makes the other gang members to also act, but they get dealt with just as quickly. Hyanu finds the sight of Gunyeb dealing with his underlings by using brass knuckles, as though he had come knowing what was happening to be ridiculous. Giving a hint that he recognizes who Gunyeb is, he grins and launches himself forward to confront Gunyeb and hits him on side of his stomach with a punch. Gunyeb recoils with a painful grunt as he realizes that he had deliberately hit him on his right side, knowing it would hurt him. Hyanu seems to recognize Gunyeb from an incident back in middle school, as he mentions it in passing. Shocked at the fact that someone from Yusung High had recognized him, and realizing that he would be at a disadvantage, Gunyeb throws the brass knuckle he had in hand and breaks the glass on the ceiling right above the group and succeeds in shifting their attention for a moment. After a while, having guarded against the falling glass, Hyanu is finally able to check back on Gunyeb and notices that he was nowhere to be seen along with Ms. Lee and decides to go after them in a hurry. Gammon Yoon, who had been trying for some time to contact Ms. Lee, now is filled with disappointment as he trudges along the road with drooped shoulders. He sighs out of pity, contemplating over whether he should continue to head towards Miss Lee's home or just go back and get the book he wanted on Monday, when suddenly he hears the voices of Hyanu and his gang from behind as they can be seen rushing somewhere in a hurry. He catches them talking about Ms. Lee as he turns around with a serious face to follow after and stop them for questioning. As Gunyeb and Ms. Lee attempted to escape from her apartment, they get blocked by another group which had split up from Hyanu's gang. One of the group member recognizes Ms. Lee with the help of the picture he had of her on his phone. Noticing how pretty she was, they make passes on her, offering her to instead come teach in their school, when Gunyeb suddenly steps forward to cover her from their sights so that he could defend her if anything happened. One of the gang members also recognizes Gunyeb, who had come forward as someone from the same middle school, and this startles Gunyeb again, as he wonders if he also knew about the incident Hyanu was talking about. But fortunately for him, he only knew him as the person who had transferred from America in their second year, and had beaten him up to take up his spot as Seiwa Middle School's second in command. Now that he was again in front of him, the gang member is determined to take Gunyeb down for the humiliation he had suffered from his hands back in middle school and regain his order back, and launches himself at Gunyeb. Seeing the member coming at him, Gunyeb counterattacks with the crowbar he had in hand and twists the leg of the guy with a swing. The member screams in pain, catching the other members off guard as well. After seeing that Gunyeb had pulled out a crowbar, the other members also pull out their weapons, ready to beat up Gunyeb. Gunyeb also readies his weapon and rushes forward to deal with the gangsters as Ms. Lee turns around, wanting to hurry and report this matter to the police, but is startled to see Hyanu already caught up and in front of her, blocking her way. Hyanu reaches out his hand towards Ms. Lee to grab her as Gunyeb could be seen in the background having an intense fight with the gangsters. Ms. Lee closes her eyes from fear of the incoming hand as she laments over what could have possibly happened to turn the once innocent kids into this, but Hyanu's action suddenly come to a halt when Gamin Yoon, who had also followed behind them, grabs Hyanu's hoodie by the cap and pulls him back with enough force to put him on the ground. Ignoring Hyanu and the other punk with him, Gamin goes towards Ms. Lee, inquiring about the current situation, and learns about Gunyeb, who had helped Ms. Lee escape. As they are busy talking, both Hyanu and the other punk comes running towards Gamin from both sides, but Gamin jumps in the air suddenly, hitting them with a split kick and knocking them down. Gunyeb turns around, distracted by the scene caused by Gamin, but this leads to him getting caught off guard and getting whacked with a chain in the stomach. Gunyeb kneels down, reeling in pain as the gang members are about to continue their assault when Gamin suddenly intervenes with a flying kick and snatches the chain from him. Another guy comes running with a wooden stick in hand, but Gamin blocks the stick with the chain. He swiftly coils the chain around the stick and pulls back, making the stick leave the attacker's hands. Gamin continues to coil the chain around the wooden stick and then breaks it into two parts, making Gunyeb question his actions. Another one of the guys from the gang, seeing that Gamin could throw some punches, picks up a glass bottle from the ground and attacks Gamin from behind, intending on finishing him off with a surprise attack which he was sure would land. Gunyeb, noticing the attack, suddenly turns and is about to intervene when Gamin uses the makeshift nunchucks he had made to shatter the glass bottle. More of the gang members arrive as they surround Gamin Yoon, who asks Gunyeb if he would be interested in joining their study group, as he must be good at English because he used to live in America, instead on focusing on the fight in front of him. Gunyeb retorts, saying it isn't the right time to be talking about study groups and that they should focus on dealing with the gang members instead. Ignoring the remark, Gamin passes the bags he was holding to Gunyeb as he gets ready to fight with all the gangsters by himself. At the same time, we also see Gamin's mom appreciating his son for making a school schedule, but gets ticked off when she notices something really small written there along with the schedule. She squints her eyes to see something written about training with nunchucks as she questions what could her son possibly be learning this for. Back at the place near Ms. Lee's apartment, Gamin Lee knocks two of the members out by a spinning attack from the nunchucks. The other members are surprised by the fact that he had made nunchucks from their weapons and was even proficient in using it, but trusting in their numbers, they rush ahead to deal with Gamin, but they also get whacked on their faces in quick succession by Gamin. One of the guys also attacks with a wooden stick, which Gamin deflects and catches with the chains on his nunchucks and uses a kick to smack the person away. Another guy rushes past the fallen member to deal with Gamin, but he gets caught by his nape with the help of the chain, and Gamin proceeds to crash his face straight onto the ground. Gunyeb is struck speechless by this scene as he wonders about the difference in strength between him and Gamin. He finds the gap between the two of them unbelievable, even though he had somewhat imagined that Gamin would be strong enough from the fact that he had beat Jaehoang Chu with no effort. After the fight is over, Ms. Lee runs towards Gamin with worry-filled eyes, showing concern for his safety. A sudden sound rings out as both Gamin and Ms. Lee turn around to see Gunyeb, smacking Hyanu on his face with a bottle, making him fall down with blood covering his face. Gunyeb then uses the crowbar he had to intimidate him and asks him about the culprit behind the Incheon Donggu "Don't Ask" murder case which had occurred during his middle school days. He had assumed that Hyanu Lee would most likely know about it, considering that he was so crazy about the White Lead gang. Getting no answer in response, Gunyeb readies the crowbar, threatening Hyanu of splitting his skull open, and is serious about wanting to follow through with it. He brings down the crowbar, eliciting loud screams of fear from Hyanu, but the crowbar is suddenly caught by Gamin, who tells him to stop. Gunyeb refuses to back down as he reveals that his mom had died because of it and that he should take Ms. Lee and fuck off instead of bothering him any longer, while also refusing his offer of joining his study group. After hearing Gunyeb mention his mother's death, everything else goes past his mind except the word murder. He struggles to even imagine how he would feel if his mother was murdered by someone instead. Gunyeb asks him again to leave him unless he wanted to get hit, but is surprised when Gamin suddenly punches Hyanu on his face and pushes him against the wall in a very rough manner. Gamin is filled with rage as he had assumed that the murder that took place was at the hands of Hyanu. He demands an answer from him while continuously choking him as Hyanu desperately begs for someone to save him. Seeing that Gamin had acted on his own without properly listening to him, Gunyeb intervenes and stops Gamin from hurting Hyanu Lee any further. And as it turns out, he learns from Gunyeb that Hyanu couldn't have murdered anyone because he didn't have the guts to do so. Gamin quickly lets go of Hyanu as Gunyeb explains that Hyanu was someone who was easily scared but acts tough in front of his crew, when all he was is just a mere slave of Hanwal. After seeing a coward such as Hyanu Lee, Gunyeb wanted to only vent his frustrations a little. He says that if punks like these weren't taught a lesson, they would repeat the same things again and asks Ms. Lee to decide on how to deal with him. Ms. Lee suggests he should be given a just punishment, but Gunyeb advises her that she shouldn't believe in something like a just punishment and that he is only saying that because she reminded him of his mother. On Gamin's side, it takes him a while to remember who Hanwal was, and Gunyeb tells him that him being so dense was the reason why they couldn't get along. He soon leaves after saying all this as Gamin talks about his image of Gunyeb. In the aftermath of the event, Ms. Lee feels even more motivated to learn where this kids went wrong and what made them what they are now in the first place. She goes up to Hyanu and stands right in front of him, causing him to flinch by her sudden action. Gamin is then given his book back and is sent home by Miss Lu, leaving her to handle the rest. Monday came and another obstacle was thrown in the study group's way. Ms. Lee informed the study group members that they were ordered by the headmaster to recruit a minimum of 5 people within the next 2 weeks, or else the study group won't have any official support from the school. Gamin and Seinen are both left hopeless as so far, the people had only been belittling them, which made them doubt if anyone would even be interested in joining in the first place. Gamin suggests they just do it unofficially, but Ms. Lee is too motivated to prove the headmaster wrong. She then suddenly remembers that someone had already contacted her and asks Gamin and Seinen to go get her. After some time, both Gamin and Seinen can be seen peeking inside a classroom with embarrassed faces. They try to recall the name of the student, which was Jaiwoo Lee, that they were supposed to talk with. Here is where we learn that Yusung Tech High was actually a co-ed school. Meanwhile, on the other side, Hanwal arrives in front of Ms. Lee asking her for the reason he was called to meet her. Yusung Tech High was indeed a co-ed school, but the male to female students were thoroughly separated. There are even students who never even speak to another gender until graduation. Just like that, both Gamin and Seinen are also nervous to call out to a girl they did not know. They have a small argument outside the class about who would call out to Jaiwoo Lee, and a few moments later, a girl walks past them and enters the classroom looking for Jaiwoo. Seeing the person who responded to the call, Seinen is surprised and pulls back Gamin, informing him that they were lucky they found out who she was before having to talk with her, as she was the twin sister of Hyanu Lee, the same guy who Gamin had to deal with few days prior. Seinen recognized this from their matching orange-haired color and surnames. From what he had heard, her reputation was just as bad as Hyanu's, so it was doubtful if she really applied for something like a study group. They think she might be a delinquent as well, but are surprised again when they see her getting slapped by another girl, named Mihi Huang, across her face. They learned that she had done so because Jaiwoo hadn't done the work she had asked her to do for her. Jaiwoo Lee refuses to cower back in fear, but instead makes fun of Mihi for acting like she was from the 80s. After a quick and heated back and forth between the two of them, Mihi notices another girl standing beside them, named Hee-won Choi, and grabs the paper she had been holding in her hand. She reads and learns that it was a paper about her midterm preparation plan and throws it like trash, considering it pathetic. Seeing that Hee-won was still mindlessly staring at her, Mihi gets annoyed and is about to hit Hee-won with a slap when Jaiwoo suddenly interferes by grabbing her hand. She tells her to leave Hee-won alone and take out all of her anger on her instead. Mihi tries to escape from Jaiwoo's grasp but finds it hard to do because of her strength. She starts slapping away at Jaiwoo in anger, making the nearby standing Hee-won to close her eyes in fear. Mi-hee continues to order Jaiwoo around and is about to leave when she notices the paper she had taken from Hee-won earlier, lying on the ground. She spits out the gum she was chewing with a sneer onto the paper, and just as it is about to hit the paper, Gamin intervenes and stops the gum with his fingers. Startled by this sudden intervention, Mi-hee demands to know the reason for him being in their classroom, but Gamin outright ignores her as he picks up the paper to study the preparation plan written on it. Gamin compliments Hee-won for making something like this when he gets called out from behind by Jujin Kim, a close friend of Hanwoo and also Jaiwoo Lee's boyfriend. Jujin had recognized him as the one who beat Jae-hwang up and tells him to come along with him somewhere. Hearing Jujin talking about going somewhere with him, he recalls the mess he had made earlier and what it had led to, which is why he quickly turns around and leaves the classroom without looking back or even bothering to wait for Si and Kim, thinking that Jaiwoo Lee would be safe now that her boyfriend had arrived. Jujin is disappointed that he ran away so quickly but decides to forget about him for now and focus on his girlfriend, Jaiwoo Lee, instead. Seeing that his girlfriend had been talking with other men, he tells him to put out her hand. This sentence causes Gamin to stop in his tracks as Jujin and Mi-hee continue to mock Jaiwoo. Jujin forces Jaiwoo to extend her trembling hands so that he can hit her in the name of punishment. Jujin says that he would only hit her 3 times as Jaiwoo curses right to his face. He hits her once with a stick, making a loud smack ring throughout the classroom. He winds up his hands, getting ready to hit her again when a gum thrown from somewhere comes flying and sticks right on his hair. Irritated, Jujin turns around, asking for the culprit who threw the gum. He notices Gamin standing there, asking him what he was doing to her when she was her girlfriend. Jujin is impressed that Gamin had returned and was in fact not a coward who would run away from a fight. He grabs Gamin by the collar in a rough manner, intending to start a fight with him, but is stopped by the shouts of Hyunil Kong, the bald-headed dean who the students had nicknamed as Tom Kench. He is angry over the fact that Jujin was messing around in the female students' classroom instead of gathering for the student council meeting, even though it was being announced at the time. Jujin lets go of Gamin because of the ruined mood and leaves for the student council, but not before turning around to warn Gamin that he would see him soon. Gamin is just relieved by the fact that he didn't get into a fight, but the other students in the class starts whispering among each other, blaming Jaiwoo Lee as the cause of all the disturbances that occur in their classroom. Hearing all this, Jaiwoo lets out an irritated sigh and turns around to leave the classroom with Hee-won following behind her. During the lunch break, Sein snaps at Gamin for picking a fight with a student council member, but sighs when he hears that Gamin didn't know Jujin was from the student council. Sein tells him that messing with a student council members ensures a life full of hell at school and tells him not to act up any further. Gamin tells him that he couldn't stand seeing a member of their study group getting bullied, making Sein doubt his intelligence as Jaiwoo Lee wasn't even a confirmed member yet. As he is about to say something further to him, he notices Hee-won Choi running towards them. She greets them while trying to catch her breath. Gamin and Sein learn from her that it was actually her who had applied in the name of Jaiwoo Lee and begs them to help her friend Jaiwoo. Hearing this, they make Hee-won sit down and further listen to her explanation regarding Jaiwoo's case. She tells them about how she was made an outcast in middle school while also being very bad at studying. She still had a trauma from that, and even though she didn't want to, she still somehow ended up at this school, which she considered to be scary. And again, within a week, she was made a target again and her money was regularly taken from her. Once when she was crying on her table because the money she had gotten for buying some school books was taken away from her, Jaiwoo had come up to her, asking what had happened. After listening to her explanation, Jaiwoo had quickly turned around and after noticing her target, vented all of her anger by using a shoulder throw on the girl who had taken Hee-won's money. This act of hers had basically saved Hee-won, and after that Jaiwoo would always tell her to study and not become defenseless. She would push her to study when she was down, and they had gotten so close that they would even go to the library together on weekends. The main problem had started when Jaiwoo's brother borrowed a huge sum of money from Jujin, and when he borrowed the money, Jujin purposefully filmed Hyunwoo assault someone so that he could then threaten to release the videos if Hyunwoo did not pay him back. With the USB of the video as collateral, Jujin forced Jaiwoo to listen to his orders. He wanted to try to break Jaiwoo, who was normally defiant. Even though she would always grumble at his brother, he was still his only family, making him her weak spot. That was how the bullying and mockery towards Jaiwoo had all started. Knowing how much Jaiwoo had helped Hee-won during her time at the school, she reveals that she wanted to help Jaiwoo this one time before she transferred school due to her father's job. Hearing this, Gamin asks Seon jokingly about if they should bother with the student council and risk their turning out to be like hell, drawing out a strong reaction from him. Even though Seon is somewhat scared, he doesn't think that it would be a big matter to deal with considering how strong Gamin was. They agree on working together to make sure that Jaiwoo can focus on studying at school, and that first they needed to do something about that video and the USB it was on. Meanwhile, in the teacher's room, Hanwoo repeats the question he had heard from Miss Lee concerning Hyunwoo Lee to make sure he had heard the right question. He had thought that Miss Lee would try to worm something out of him for what happened on Saturday, but instead, she was pretending that nothing had happened, making him unsure about what she was up to. When he is told that he was brought here because he was close to him, he denies this claim by saying that he just knew that he had borrowed from his friend and had not paid him back it. Continuing this topic, Hanwoo tries to bring up the name of Jaiwoo Lee, but is cut off by Miss Lee, who mentions her before he could. On the other side, inside the student council room, a fat bald student is seen holding a USB in his hands, thinking that he would have a chance to fool around with Jaiwoo too if he used it for himself. The next thought he has is about the empty student council room, as he was the only one present when the other members usually shut themselves in. He wonders where everyone had gone, as Gamin can be seen peeking through the open crack on the door with one of his eyes. The time before Gamin had headed to the student council room to investigate, the trio can be seen discussing about the matter when Seon brings up that they should never go near the student council room. When asked why, he explains that the student council body was basically just a bunch of delinquents who use it as a cover to comfortably keep the students in line. They would use it to deal with the minor delinquents, and right now all of the members of the council were rumored to be Hanwoo Pai's close friends. To put it simply, he owned the council. At the mention of Hanwoo Pai, Hee-won covers her face with a startled expression, which Seon points out as a normal reaction from an ordinary student, unlike Gamin, who only ever thought about studying and nothing else. Believing that the USB which was used to blackmail Jaiwoo would definitely be in the student council room despite the strong opposition from Seon Kim. Gamin can be seen heading there, as we also see Mahee running out of the washroom while snickering as Jaiwoo is inside, soaked from head to toe with water. As Gamin is inspecting the council room from the outside, the fat guy named Do-hun Young struggles to decide if he should make a copy of the video file so that he could later use it to also blackmail Jaiwoo and have his way with her. After coming to a decision, he heads up to the computer to copy the content in the USB when the other door to the room suddenly opens with a slam as Jujin walks in, complaining about Tom Kench. His and his friends' gazes land on the USB stuck on the PC as Do-hun Jub fails to come up with an excuse in time. During the brief silence, Jujin and his friend understands that the piggy, as they called him, wanted to have his way with Jaiwoo as well, causing them to laugh at the thought. He grabs the piggy by his collars and smashes him into the ground with a shoulder throw, causing Do-hun Young to faint. Jujin's friend compliments his judo techniques as they go to retrieve the USB. Just as Jujin is about to pull out the USB, he changes his mind and comes up with an idea to just upload the video on YouTube while they were at it. Gamin in the back is shocked by his decision as Jujin continues to talk about how Jaiwoo would feel like if the only family members of her was dragged to a juvenile right in front of her. They laugh at her situation, imagining how she was going to suffer, as Gamin pulls out his glasses to put them in with a vicious expression on his face. Meanwhile, Seon and Jiwon are also watching the situation unfold from a nearby corner with worried gazes. Seeing that there were 3 of them against Gamin, Seon decides to go for what they had discussed earlier, pretending to fight with Jiwon to draw their attention away from Gamin. Jiwon is confused, seemingly from forgetting the plan they were talking about, but Seon pushes forward, telling her to act even she had never once cursed in her life to buy some time for Gamin to get out. While this bickering continues, Jaiwoo Lee, who had been coming down the stairs, notices Jiwon talking with Seon from a distance as the scene cuts back to the meeting room with Miss Lee and Hanwoo Pai. Continuing their previous conversation, Hanwoo tells Miss Lee that she should have just contacted his sister if she already knew about her instead of asking him about it. He looks with disdain in his gaze after learning that his time had been wasted for nothing as he gets up to leave the room. As he opens the door, he turns around as if he remembered something he wanted to say and tells Miss Lee those who dream of becoming a good teacher are fools and that she should stop bothering with people whose lives were basically over just like all the other teachers in the school do instead of meddling in unnecessarily. Listening to this, Miss Lee answers, keeping her cool, that even though there could be someone seemingly incapable of any sort of positive change, there still was not a single person in this world which she believed should be given up on. Sharing this same belief with Miss Lee, deciding that he wouldn't mind the ruckus he is about to cause just to help Hyunwoo and Jaewoo, Gamin rushes in the council room and punches the person standing beside Jujin on the face, knocking him out. Startled by this sudden invasion, Jujin gets up from the seat hurriedly with clear anger, which can be seen on his face as he gets ready to confront Gamin. But Jujin soon regains his calm as he realizes that Gamin had been hiding inside the locker and starts mocking him, calling him a child. As he continues to go on about it, it starts getting on his nerves that kids like Gamin refuse to be taught a lesson. Aside from that, he also assumes that Gamin was only doing this because he liked Jaewoo and points it out, causing Gamin to blush in embarrassment. Gamin is confused and struggles to properly answer and just keeps glancing towards the USB stuck on the PC. Jujin also notices this, confirming his belief that Jaewoo had told him to steal the USB for her. The knockdown guy wobbles up back on his feet, pissed off by the fact that Gamin had attacked him in a cowardly manner, catching him off guard. He rushes ahead, wanting to take out his anger on Gamin, but Gamin retaliates with a fist to his face, knocking him completely unconscious this time. Ignoring the defeated guy, Gamin focuses his attention on Jujin, who is also somewhat surprised by the strength of Gamin. Gamin declares that it would not be Jujin but him teaching a lesson, and when he did, Jujin would learn that it was him that was in the wrong. This pisses off Gyujin even more, that he thinks that he would rather die than get beaten up by Gamin first. Jujin declares the start of their fight as he quickly reaches out for a collar grab and slams Gamin on the floor with a throw. Jujin looks at the fallen Gamin as he mocks him for his light weight, but his words get caught in his mouth when he notices that Gamin had let Jujin throw him purposefully so that he could reach for the USB with ease. Gamin then takes out the USB from the PC as Jujin lunges forward in desperation to get the USB back. Seeing Jujin coming towards him, Gamin puts the USB inside his pocket and gets up with the help of his hands and delivers a kick straight at Jujin's face. Jujin is thrown back and crashes into the chairs behind him. Do-hun-young, the piggy, who had woken up just now, notices Jujin getting beaten up and losing to Gamin, shocking him, and decides to continue pretending to be unconscious so as to not get caught up in their fight. Jujin also gets back up, threatening Gamin with the name of the student council, and dashes forward again to engage in close combat. He tries to reach out for a grab, but Gamin dodges the move pretty easily by backing up a bit. He picks up the student council clothing and throws it towards Jujin, covering his face with it. Not giving him any time to react, Gamin rushes in and punches Jujin's face as Do-hun-young witnesses the scene of Jujin falling down in defeat with shock-filled eyes. Gamin scoffs at the idea of Jaewoo being treated as an object by Jujin and turns around to leave the council room to settle the matter, but is stopped in his tracks when a beat-up Jujin, with blood running down his nose and a swollen eye, calls out to Gamin from behind, telling him about how the file had already been uploaded to the computer and was being processed on YouTube now. He threatens to make the lives of Jaewoo and Hyunwoo a hell as revenge, catching Gamin off guard and unsure how to react. Just as Gamin is about to act, the door behind him opens as the dean enters the council room, commenting on the bad cigarette smell coming from the room. He looks around and notices Gamin, who he knew had caused a scene last time, and also the students lying down on the floor unconscious and Jujin beaten up. Taking this time where Gamin was distracted by the sudden and unexpected visit from the dean, Jujin clicks on the screen, uploading the video to YouTube. Meanwhile, outside the student council room, Hee-won and See-in explain what they had been planning to Jaewoo. Jaewoo sees that even a kid as shy as Hee-won was acting up to help Jaewoo with her situation when all she did was sit back and take it all, feeling pathetic for obediently letting them lash out on her. Making up her decision, she turns around with newfound confidence and heads towards the student council room to finally put an end to this ill relationship with Jujin. But she soon gets shocked pretty hard and is dumbfounded after witnessing the sight unfolding before her as Gamin can be seen running out of the student council room with a whole computer set up in his hands as Jujin desperately calls out to him from behind. It is a scene from 3 months ago. Jujin had been practicing with his judo in the clubroom when he notices Jaewoo Lee in the club, also practicing. He tells his friend that he had first seen her in the promotional video for the dojo and that she was just his type. His friends warns him about Jaiwoo, saying she was no joke and that all the guys that had hit on her got beaten up brutally by her. She had been doing judo for a long time as just a hobby but was able to fight at a professional level so much that she was even called the Ronda Rousey of the Seoin Middle School. Jaiwoo Lee overhears the guys talking about her and goes up to Jujin, asking him if he wanted to fight her. Seeing Jaiwoo had come to him by herself, Jujin's ego bloats up even more as he asks her what school she had applied to. Learning that Jaiwoo was going to be attending Yusung High, which he was a second year in, he tells her that if she got to know him, her life at school would be easy. He extends his hand asking for a handshake, but Jaiwoo grabs his sleeve, causing Jujin to flinch, as he foresees the outcome where he would get thrown to the ground and defeated in a single move. He pulls back his hand in fear as Jaiwoo scoffs at Jujin for getting scared so easily after looking down on her so much. Jujin's friend laughs at him from behind as Jujin grits his teeth and trembles all over in rage. He swears that he would find some dirt on her to make sure her life became hell and will make something up even if he had to just to break her. Back in the present, Jujin smirks while looking at the video having been uploaded on YouTube on the screen. All he had left to do was click on post and then it would be posted on the internet for all to see. He clicks on it as the percentage bar can be seen going up real fast. Just thinking about the face Jaiwoo would make when she sees this go up makes him smile as he looks back to mock Gammon for all of his wasted efforts. His eyes follow to the place Gammon had been moments prior but is confused to see only the dean standing there. He is even more shocked when he realizes that Gammon intended to take out the whole CPU, disconnecting it from the internet cable in hopes of stopping the video to go up. Gammon holds his breath as he puts even more strength into removing the CPU, which leads to the cable coming off from the socket, which also breaks due to the force behind the pull. This is how Gammon takes off from the student council room after removing the PC as he meets up with the oncoming Jaiwoo. Noticing her, he tells her to turn around and run. Jaiwoo struggles to understand the situation but still complies and turns around to tag along with Gammon to escape. She asks Gammon what was going on and Gammon just tells her that they needed to somehow smash the PC so that Jaiwoo can finally be free from Jujin's bullshit. They meet up with Seinen and Hee-won as the dean continues to chase after them. Witnessing the scene and joining the pieces together, Seinen is quick to understand what was going on and what Gammon intended to do. Just then, Gammon trips over a wire causing him to fall and the CPU to leave his hands. He orders Seinen to quickly take the CPU to the lab and smash it as the dean finally catches up to Gammon and captures him. Realizing the desperate situation they were in, Seinen makes up his mind quickly as he picks up the CPU and starts going up the stairs. The dean also orders Jujin to go after Seinen to apprehend him as Jujin trudges along with heavy breaths. On Seinen's side, realizing that going to the first floor and then to the lab building with a heavy chunk like this would just lead to him getting caught quickly given his stamina. Left with no other choice, he heads up to the rooftop believing that dropping it down from there would surely smash the CPU into pieces. Just as he is about to drop the CPU down, Jujin arrives as he loudly calls out to Seinen. Catching his attention, he threatens Seinen to bring it to him. Seinen seems to comply to him as he walks towards him in a drooping manner. Seeing this, Jujin is elated and starts laughing while mocking Seinen as someone who would always be a loser. Hearing this, Seinen stops in his tracks and with anger evident on his face, throws the CPU over his head. This action catches Jujin off guard as he belatedly starts running towards Seinen Kim to teach him a lesson for not complying with his orders. He screams in anger but is shocked speechless when Jaiwoo arrives right beside him without any notice. Jaiwoo seems to finally understand the words Gammon had spoken to her and reaches out to grab Jujin and smashes him down with a shoulder throw. At the same time, the CPU also touches the ground and is smashed to pieces, bringing an end to the reason behind Jaiwoo's suffering. Finally free from her weakness and having not been satisfied by beating Jujin up just once, stomps on his chest as he notifies Jujin about how she was going to continue beating Jujin up until she was satisfied in a threatening tone.